Welcome to the AI+HI Project, a SHRM podcast. I'm your host, Nichol Bradford, SHRM's executive in residence. Today, we're exploring the intersection between HR leadership, AI, and culture with Tina Jones, Senior Vice President of Global Human Resources at Cadence Design Systems. Tina has been instrumental in driving innovative HR initiatives and very innovative projects around AI that I consider to be essential. And we have the opportunity to chat with her today. So, welcome to the AI+HI project, Tina.
Thank you so much for having me, Nicole. And thank you to your audience for tuning in. I just really admire the work you're doing at SHRM and you personally. So I'm really honored to be here.
Oh, this is fantastic to have you. Just to lay the groundwork for everyone, you have been in HR for a while, and I'd love to hear, why did you choose this? What inspired you about HR, and also why have you stayed at the same company?
Mm, Such great questions. Uh, you know, I just think HR is the secret gem of corporate jobs. Uh, you can do so many different things in HR. If you want to lean operational, if you want to lean brand and marketing, if you want to lean interpersonal development, the more technical side of systems or comp and ben. There's so many incredible opportunities in HR. And I think finally our value is being recognized at companies as it probably should have been for years, but we have a real voice at the table as the importance of talent is being recognized to the success of so many companies. So I think HR is really just I tell young people, like, you need to look into HR because there are just so many aspects of being an HR these days, and it's changing so rapidly that I think it will continue to be just an incredibly interesting field to work in. I did not mean to come into HR, Nicole. I don't know about you, but I was minding my own business. I was an attorney and I did a lot of work for the company I'm at now, Cadence, as their outside counsel, and then came in house for 4 years. And then, as some people at Cadence know, I was at Starbucks, as I am every single morning. So shout out to Starbucks. And I was getting my morning coffee, and the CEO called me and asked me to take the HR job. So I really did not think I was the most qualified person. I was not the most qualified person. But looking back, of course, it was the biggest opportunity of my career. And I'm so glad that even though I pushed back and, of course, in ways women should not, told him the 50 reasons I was not the best person, ended up sort of jumping in and taking the leap. And it's just been such a fabulous opportunity and journey for me at Cadence. So I think I've been in the job about 17 years.
It's interesting to hear how you came to Cadence and just also what your initial thoughts were when you got into it, because I have been in the aura of your impact through FemAI. I've seen the table that you set, who came to the table, and the conversation that you established
Mm.
around the biggest thing since the internet,
Yeah.
AI and diversity and equity inside of it. But before we get to that, I just want to share something. One of the other things that you mentioned was that HR is really getting a seat at the table. One
Yeah.
of the things that we've seen in our research around successful AI implementations is that HR is in the room, that there's this incredible combination that happens when the CTO and CHRO, or the IT leader and the HR leader, are combined to really help the organization. And I think that, from the pandemic to the implementation of I think, to your point, one of the reasons, especially why young people should be thinking about HR, is because HR is essential for sort of intertidal, extraordinary moments that really impact people inside of organizations. I do want to go back to how we met, which was through the Fem AI event. And
Right.
so you talk a little bit about that event, what inspired you to do it,
Sure.
and how what you feel its impact could be on AI.
Yeah.
Then a little bit about, like, your CEO at Cadence is amazing. Like, I was really impressed. And so
Okay.
what was the thing that made him say yes to this?
Right. Well, thank you for coming. We were so thrilled when you said yes to being there. And we did have an inaugural event to launch what we're calling the Fem AI initiative. And the Fem AI initiative is focused on making sure that women don't miss out on the internet. Sorry, not the internet, on the AI revolution. There's a very good argument for the fact that they largely missed out on the internet revolution. And so we've come to the conclusion at Cadence that by looking at the data, um, women are going to be left behind. So today, the AI workforce, not easy to define, but is about 20% women. It's about 10% of the AI leadership. If you look at, who's publishing papers, who is leading AI teams, who are CEOs of AI companies, we're talking about 10% of those people are women. So you're 20% of the population working on AI and 10% of its leadership. If you just stop there, I mean, it means women's fingerprints are not going to be on the future of AI and how it's developed. Um, Not to mention that, these numbers are all over the place, but many people feel that almost 100 million jobs will be created between now and 2030, and about $15 trillion of additional economic opportunity. So if women are left behind on this huge opportunity from a job perspective, it could be very detrimental to women and to families. So we identified this issue. Of course, never happy with our own demographics at Cadence, always working on it. But we have, by focusing on women in our recruiting and in our retention practices and in how we develop people, we've been able to increase the number of our technical women. And we have a lot of 90% of our jobs are technical jobs by 50% over the last decade. And it just means focusing on who are you recruiting, what pools you're going to, what qualifications you're saying are absolutely essential. And so we've really been able to widen our aperture, go to different schools than we went to before, be open to getting people who we might have to train for 3 to 6 months as opposed to someone who's done the exact same thing for 5 years. And so we've really been able to move the needle on the number of women at our company. Still learning, still have a long way to go, but we wanted to take what we learned and to do something honestly for the bigger community. And to the credit of our CEO that you mentioned, his name is Anuruth Devgan. He created a foundation, so we put money into a foundation. We're lucky enough to have done well enough as a company to have that kind of funding, and we created a foundation which I lead with our head of social impact, Nicole Johnson. And we laid two bets. One was a climate change bet. We've made a big investment in trying to stem climate change. And the other investment we've made, which is $20 million, we have pledged to ensuring that women are brought along in the AI revolution.
One of the things that came up at the conference was certainly the economic impact of women not being included in the AI revolution on the development and deployment side and products being developed. But then the other side that several of the guests mentioned was the importance of diverse voices of all kinds in the development of AI that serves all. Would you mind speaking to that? Because several of the guests talked about it. It was really inspiring to me.
Me too. And when we very much in the style of my boss, he said we're going to start with a big summit and it's going to be, very groundbreaking and really make a difference and have a lot of impact. So, honestly, I had to learn, Nicole, I had to learn so much more about AI than I knew. Who were the real voices in AI who were out there saying interesting things, talking about the future, and touching on issues of diversity in AI. Who are the policymakers? Who are the leaders of engineering who are really crafting what AI is looking like as it's being developed. So I did a deep dive into the world of AI, and particularly with a lens of what's happening to women. And you're right. I mean, we had speakers like Dr. Joy Bulamwini, whom you heard speak, and others, and then policy wonks, um, who talked about, let's first of all pull back the pull back the veil a bit and look underneath. And if you don't do anything intentional and you just let the data sets we have, and be that as it may, and you build AI on top of what you already have, there will be these crazy outcomes like Dr. Joy Bulamini talked about. And she said, if you just let facial recognition use the data sets that are already tagged, Serena Williams will show up as a man. Oprah Winfrey will not be recognized as a woman. Michelle Obama will not be recognized as a woman, things like that. So, she has done all this research on facial recognition, and how if you just accept what we already have as a baseline and build AI on top, you will have some very strange outcomes, because then facial recognition, of course, can be used for a panoply of things, including, where drones strike, right? So she tells a very cautionary tale of us needing to question the data that's already being used as our basis. And then she talks a lot about, diversity of thought, diversity of opinion, evaluating, testing AI solutions. And that can be diversity of the type of person by gender. It can even be, making sure that the process that you're using is being questioned, and they are not just doing something because it's how it would have been done,
Mhm.
in the past. So we had speakers who talked about that. And then from a policy standpoint, there's just a lot to think about on, what do we as a society want AI to look like in the future? What is ethical AI? Where do we want the guardrails? And I think everyone who knows anything about AI recognizes that it can be incredibly powerful. And that if we don't set up guardrails, probably at different levels, companies testing their own use of AI and their own data and how it's being used in light of AI, to states, to federal government, to international governments, and how AI will be used. If we are not working on that kind of policy, guardrails, testing, that we could have some results that could be, extremely negative for society, not just for women or minorities in any way, but for all of society.
Yes. And then on the upside, what we've seen in our research and then also in studying the determinants of success and the determinants of failure is that when for the organizations that are really doing interesting things, the people who are helping to develop the better use cases are often the people who are the closest to the work. And so those people being very close to the work are typically also they represent the entire range of an employee base. And so there's a part of, the way to get the best outcomes is to actually have a diverse group defined lots of different ways, levels, geographic, age involved. And so we see that on the other side too. We see it in the cases
And
that
Nicole, I would add that and I think Paula Goldman of Salesforce touched on this. If you're going to, especially in high tech, if you're going to have AI solutions and hold yourself out there as an organization that uses AI and it makes you better and makes your customers better, your customers are only going to trust your solutions if you are testing, like you mentioned, testing products on a wide range of types of people, right? So I think it's not maybe just a nice to have, but it's probably going to be critical to customer trust in what we put out into the market, certainly for high tech. Um, and something else you just mentioned on women in the workforce that you just triggered, but the other thing we touched upon at the summit is that not only should we worry about bringing women along for women, and for maybe what it means to larger economic benefit of society. But, we are probably going to have a dramatic talent shortage, certainly in high tech as AI continues to develop. And unless, I think Unruh said it well, but he's like, I want the best of the best. So why wouldn't I tap into 50% of the population, right? So there is a talent shortage perspective that we feel is very important to making sure women are building the skills so that they can be part of that workforce.
Yeah, a little while after the FemAI event, there was a bit of research that came out from code.org. And one of the things that they saw is that, one of the characteristics that increased representation in STEM, both by gender, socioeconomic levels, and diversity, racial diversity, and other things, is just simply making computer science a graduation criteria.
Mm,
And it's a good example of one thing that, there's lots of things that help, but like one thing that really makes a difference. And so now several states are starting to add that on. And I
interesting.
love it because, this world that's coming with AI, we see that the LLMs adoption was 3 times cell phones. We see that today 40% of the American population uses an LLM every day, every day. So extraordinary. And then now
Right.
we have, agents coming in. And so, having something that for all young people helps them have an understanding of the language of the future. It's so critical.
Well, I thought you're reminding me of so many things, but we had on stage the deans of engineering from Stanford, MIT, and UC Berkeley, as well as an associate professor at Stanford leading robotics. She sort of represented the next generation of professors, and you know they talked about we. I think John Hennessy, who was the 10th president of Stanford, and he was the moderator. We used the analogy of medicine, and it was something like 6% of, people in medical school in the 1960s was women. It was like 6, 7% or something. And how that's now, I think women are almost 50%, right? Or they are 50% of people in medical school. But the biological sciences actually were able to, make a shift and encourage and retain women in biological sciences, that the hard core, especially the harder core engineering, a bit better on computer science, but really harder core engineering, has not really been able to do. And one other aspect, you said just taking a computer science class, therefore being comfortable, not being intimidated by it, knowing it's accessible could be such a critical shift that could, move things at scale. What they talked about was making it more human. And so if we generalize and say maybe girls and women relate to, fields that are, maybe more human in nature in some sense. But, showing connecting the dots between the work of an engineer and humanity, right? And not just making it about the math, right? But making it about the impact you have, making it about what a difference you can make with the technology you're creating could also be such a difference maker in women's interests in going into harder core STEM fields.
Well, that is a perfect segue really into culture. So one of my personal things that I'm really looking into right now is what I'm calling an AI compatible culture. And for me, that really means, and from what so far I can see from the research that we've been doing and the cases we've been seeing, that means a growth culture, an innovation culture. One of the fun things is that when you look at the companies that are doing the best with AI, they were actually companies that were already innovation companies. Were companies that were already doing great with innovation. And basically, they've just taken their culture and now there's a new tool and they're pulling that tool into their culture. And they're doing the same thing now that they did 10 years ago or 10 years before that. And they're just innovating and adding the new thing. I think different about now is that before people could admire an innovation company, they could have they could have the mission statement that said they were, but not actually do it. This technology is so defining that I think people are really going to be forced, organizations are going to be forced to change in order to onboard it successfully. Because if we're not, then their competitors are. So, what I'd love to talk about is just from a culture standpoint, because I think also the last thing I'll say before you answer the question or before we talk about it is that, one of the other things that we see that is a determinant of failure is when people say, oh, here's a technology, what can I do with it? As opposed to sort of like, what are my business problems? And so for culture, it's actually the same too. It isn't, how do I, um, stuff AI into my culture? It's how do I have a culture that is open to change and rewards that? And so, we talked a little bit about culture. I would love to just really talk about how culture is more important than ever. And you've said a lot before on the importance of culture to business success. Can you talk to us about that a bit?
No, you're hitting on such a top of mind topic. Uh, and you're just spurring me to think about it even a little bit differently. But at Cadence, we really have, I would say, walked the talk on culture driving business success. And we've, if your audience wants to look at Cadence, which if I distill it down is essentially the software for semiconductor chip design. So any chip in the world, any semiconductor chip in the world is probably made with either Cadence or our direct competitor. So we're right in the thick of it with now chips in everything and with what AI means for the power of chips. But we have really thought, and this credit to the CEO who preceded Anuruth, but, Cadence was a $2 stock and an under $1 billion valuation in 2008, 2009. And we did a complete company turnaround. And now, again, our market cap is over $80 billion and we're a $300 stock today. So, it's been a really challenging and rewarding journey, but, instead of even talking to employees about all the operational issues we had to fix, we had, messed up customer relationships. We were bureaucratic. We were siloed. We had stopped being innovative. We were just buying innovation, et cetera, et cetera. We decided to tackle our issues from a culture standpoint. And we said, wait a second, let's get our values straight. Who are we really at our core? And what do we aspire to be? We got our values clear and we used those to drive who we hired, who we promoted, who we rewarded. So take, everyone cares about customer success, but if you make it the absolute core center of every single thing you do, right? And you reward the people who do it well and you hold them out as role models, et cetera, people get the idea. And then over time, you realize, my God, we've totally changed how we work with our customers and how they feel about us.
Mm.
So I watched us honestly change as a company and change our shareholder value, of course, but through culture, which was, I learned so much going through that process. And now, who are we in the context of AI? Um, is going to be super important. And of course, we're a high tech company and we are pretty innovative by by nature. We have to be. We're working on very, very cutting edge things. Um, but we are actually partnering with the Great Place to Work Institute and this This is sort of new news, but we're going to partner with them as we roll out AI and work with them on how do you communicate with employees? How do you maintain the trust? How do they believe the AI you're encouraging them to use is ethical? How do you show the value of AI and have them not believe it's just, a way to, gain efficiency, i.e. eliminate jobs, but actually that it is an empowerment, um, you know, an empowerment tool, and that we want people working on the highest value type of work. And we want to take certain aspects of work and make it more efficient. So we are partnering with them on how do you communicate with employees? What's employees' feedback? Constantly going to be getting pulses back from employees and adjusting how we roll out something that is new to all of us. So I couldn't agree more. It can be a culture shifter, and we're a little bit unique in the question you asked just because we are an innovative high tech company. But still, you got to maintain trust with employees. They have to believe you. They have to trust, when leaders are making big changes, they have to trust that they're doing them in the right way, that they've thought it through, and that they're going to take employees' feedback to heart in making adjustments. And honestly, I didn't believe it, Nicole. I was like, this sounds like a long journey. And, we just repeated it over and over and over. And over time, we, got pretty clear on what we were as a culture and who we were. And then making that high performing, getting clear on who you are, driving high performance through culture really ended up driving our business success, right?
The thing about trust, we've also seen that too. And it's interesting. Trust is deeply embedded in culture, but also there's a big chunk of that around responsible or ethical AI is about trust. And what makes employees trust is that it's going to be transparent for them if you use it internally. It's going to be fair. They're going to know when it's being used. They're going to be able to disagree with it. Like if it says, oh, you're good for this job, but they really wanted that one, they should be able to disagree. And so there's a set of things that are in sort of responsible AI internally. And then there's another part which you talked about around the communication around efficiency. Because the people who know how to change the business architecture, like the people who really know how to get your customers to love you, are the people who are dealing with the customers today. And so if they're not on board, if they don't trust, then they don't participate. And companies don't get that benefit. And so, I think it's one of those things that sort of I call it the newest old story in that it still is about people. Like it actually really is still about people.
It seriously is. So, and take something super sensitive, which we're not doing at Cadence at this time. But I mean, let's say we feed to managers what compensation you should give to your team, what their raise should be for each person based on a whole bunch of data, what their titles should be, whether they should get stock or things like that. And so let's say you feed that to managers. Okay, that might actually save managers a lot of time, to be honest. Um, but unless that, we can't do that without the human aspect of, really knowing the person, really knowing the value they bring, really knowing what their potential is, really understanding where they make a difference around the edges, right? I mean, no amount of data that I put into Workday is ever going to help to address the human to human aspect that only that manager and that team really knows about the difference people are making. So we cannot lose the human aspect as we move to experimenting with more AI.
Yeah. Well, so we love to close our podcast with just very practical advice. So imagine there is a HR leader out there and maybe they aren't in tech, but they've, listened to our conversation and others enough to know that culture really is going to be a determinant of their AI success. What would you say about like really if you have a culture that you're trying to get back on track, what are the first 2 or 3 things that you must do as a HR leader?
Yeah, and culture is such a big and intimidating word, I think. I mean, I've used it a lot, but I do recognize that culture can be sort of a big amorphous, um, intangible word. I would say communicate, communicate, communicate. Um, you got to communicate with your employees. It's the only way to build trust. You got to keep the loop going. You need to hear back from them. We're also very scared in HR, Nicole, to always hear from employees because you can't always address all their issues. And then, so then you resist maybe hearing from them because, you don't want to not do anything with their feedback. And I completely understand that fear. But having a feedback mechanism and communicating over and over and over with employees, I think is the most critical aspect to having a healthy culture.
Wonderful. And, one of the things that I want to also add to one of the beautiful things about the FemAI event is that it raised the concerns and the things that we should all be mindful of as we're building this future of work. And also, it had a strong flavor of practical application
Mhm.
of this future that we want doesn't just happen. We actually have to build it. We have to create it. And there were people who gave examples of that. And so I just love that balance that you created. And I'm just so
Oh,
grateful for you being in the world and doing the work you
oh
do.
gosh. Well, thank you. And I hope we can have you there next year and we even improve on it. And I'd love your ideas of how to do that. And again, I have so much respect for what you do. And thank you for having me today. It was super, super exciting for me.
Thank you. And so that's going to do it for this week's episode. A big thank you to Tina for sharing her experiences and deep insights with us. And before I say goodbye, I encourage you to follow the AI+HI project wherever you enjoy your podcast. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to comment, leave a review. It really makes a difference. And finally, you can find all of our episodes on our website at shrm.org/AIHI. And thanks for the conversation, and we'll catch you next time.